Elara Zane hadn't planned on dancing that night, especially not with a stranger barefoot. Under twinkling lights with a glass of champagne she couldn't even afford to refill. The wedding was for her college roommate. Lee and Elara had only come because she couldn't say no to the woman who once held her hair back through finals season and heartbreaks. It didn't matter that her dress was borrowed or that the heels pinched so bad she'd kicked them off by cake cutting. What mattered was that Lee looked happy, glowing in a white gown, and Elara had managed to avoid both the bouquet toss and the guy from accounting who kept trying to explain cryptocurrency. She just stepped away from the dance floor when the band struck up another slow song and someone tapped her shoulder. "Dance with me," she turned, startled, and blinked up at the stranger. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with jet black hair swept back like he'd just run a hand through it, and a midnight blue suit that looked tailored within an inch of its life. His tie was gone, his top button undone, and there was something almost reckless in his smile. "I don't even know your name," Elara said, laughing softly, already feeling the pull of something different. "Then I guess we'll have to fix that. I'm Zayden." "And you, Elara?" He offered his hand, palm up, like they were at a royal ball and not some slightly chaotic backyard wedding in upstate New York. She hesitated only a second, then took it. As they moved together under the string lights, the world softened. He didn't talk much. Just held her like he'd known her longer than 3 minutes. The song ended, but they didn't stop. A second one started, slower this time, and he pulled her a little closer. "Are you always this good at dancing with strangers?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light, but her heart was thudding against her ribs. "No," he said, his voice low, like they were sharing a secret. "Only you." They danced until the music ended and the band packed up. Until people started leaving, shoes in hand, favors forgotten on tables. She didn't even realize how late it had gotten. "I should head home," she said eventually, pulling back. "My train leaves early." "Where's home?" he asked. "Brooklyn." Zayden gave her a look she couldn't quite read. "Let me drive you," she laughed, thinking he was joking. "Pretty sure you've had champagne too." "I haven't," he said simply. She blinked. "You really haven't?" He shook his head, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a key fob, sleek, matte black, with a logo she didn't recognize but screamed money. "Come on, I'll get you back safely." She hesitated. Her instincts told her he wasn't dangerous, just intense. And maybe a little too charming, but something about him made her feel safe, grounded. "If you try anything," she said, holding up a finger, "I have pepper spray and I will use it." He grinned. "Noted." The car waiting outside wasn't just a car, it was a midnight silver Aston Martin, parked between a pickup truck and a minivan like it didn't belong anywhere but a private showroom. The door opened with a soft click, and the leather smelled like it had never seen the sun. "You steal this?" she asked, mostly joking. "Nope, bought it." She raised a brow but didn't ask more. The drive was quiet but not awkward. He kept glancing at her like he was memorizing her face, and it was both flattering and unnerving. At her building in Brooklyn, he walked her to the door. "No pressure, no weirdness. Can I see you again?" he asked, voice lower now, more hesitant. "I don't even know your last name." "Kessler, Zayden Kessler." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll think about it." He smiled, then stepped back. "You're going to say yes." "I can feel it." And annoyingly, he was right. 3 days later, he showed up outside the coffee shop where she worked part-time, holding a to-go cup with her name scribbled on it in messy handwriting. "How'd you know where I worked?" she asked, startled. He didn't look sheepish at all. "Called Lee, threatened to send her 100 flamingos if she didn't tell me." "You didn't." "I absolutely did. She thinks you're being dramatic for not calling me." Elara narrowed her eyes. "You're relentless." "And you're still smiling," he said. She hated how right he was. He didn't ask her on a normal date. He said, "Clear your night," then picked her up in a car that definitely wasn't the same one from the wedding. This one was a black Rolls-Royce with starry lights in the ceiling and a driver who opened the door like they were royalty. They had dinner on the rooftop of a hotel she couldn't even afford to walk into, much less eat at. There was a table set for two, candles flickering, a private violinist, and a view of the whole Manhattan skyline behind them. "I feel like I should be wearing a gown," she whispered as they sat. "You look perfect." She did not. She wore her best dress, but it was still $28 at most and hung a little awkwardly at the waist. But he said it like he meant it. Over dinner, she asked him what he did. Investments, he said vaguely. She narrowed her eyes. That's rich guys speak for I make money from money, he laughed. You're not wrong. How rich are we talking? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, my company runs some real estate and tech portfolios. I've done well. How well? He paused, then said, well enough that I could buy this hotel if I wanted to. She choked on her water. You're joking. I'm not. She stared at him. So you're a millionaire, he said simply. Yes, Elara sat back. That's a lot to process. I didn't want to lead with that, he said. I wanted you to like me before the money did. She looked at him for a long time. I don't care about that stuff. I know, he said, smiling. That's why I couldn't stop thinking about you. Something shifted then. Because now she knew, and he knew she knew, and it didn't scare her off. She didn't say she liked him. Not yet. But her hand found his under the table, and her fingers fit perfectly between his. The next few weeks were a blur of moments that didn't feel real. A weekend trip to a vineyard in Napa, just because she mentioned she'd always wanted to go. A dress delivered to her apartment with a note. Wear this tonight. A private dinner with him on a boat that drifted past the city skyline while soft jazz played, but it wasn't just the money. It was how he listened. How he remembered the way she took her coffee, how he noticed when she was quiet, how he held her like she was something fragile and strong all at once. And when he kissed her, really kissed her, it wasn't under chandeliers or on private jets. It was on her fire escape with takeout between them and the city humming below. I think I'm starting to fall for you, he whispered. And Elara, who never trusted easily, who built walls like fortresses, let herself believe that maybe for once this could be something real. By the time autumn crept into the city, Elara had learned exactly how complicated it was to fall for a man like Zayden Kessler, not because of the money. That she'd surprisingly managed to wrap her head around. It was everything else, his world of power, influence, and people who didn't seem to understand the meaning of no. The first time she joined him at a formal event, an art auction held in a museum closed to the public for the night, she'd worn a black jumpsuit she'd borrowed from her neighbor and heels that pinched so badly her toes went numb. But it hadn't been the outfit that made her feel out of place. It was the way people looked at her. Some smiled too politely, some not at all. A woman with a platinum chignon and a dress stitched with crystals had leaned in and said with a voice like smoke, "You're not from around here, are you?" Elara had smiled, teeth tight. "Brooklyn, actually." The woman hadn't laughed. Zayden had been at her side in an instant, his hand finding the small of her back as he leaned down. "Ignore her," he'd said quietly, his voice warm with something protective. "She's allergic to people with authentic personalities." Still, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed, measured, and found lacking. Zayden didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and just didn't care. Either way, his focus never left her, not once. Not when he bid on a sculpture for a price that made her stomach turn, not when his business partner introduced her with a curious tilt of his head, not even when a reporter tried to corner him for a quote. That night, when they finally slipped out the back and into a car with glass dividers and chilled water bottles, Elara turned to him. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice low. "Do what? Float through all of that like it doesn't touch you?" Zayden didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, his jaw tight, then looked at her. "I don't float through it, Elara. I just learned how to walk through fire without flinching." She studied his profile, the way the city lights flickered across his face. "Do you ever miss the days before all this?" "I never had them," he said simply. "Not really." It was the first time she realized how little she knew about where he came from. The next morning, she found a note slipped into her coat pocket, just a single line scrawled in his sharp handwriting. "Come see where I started." She met him that evening in front of a building that looked nothing like the penthouses and luxury hotels and marble-floored restaurants he usually inhabited. The brick was faded, the windows dusty. It was a community center in Queens, tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered corner store. "This was mine," he said, pushing open the door. Inside, the place was quiet. A few kids played basketball at the far end. A woman at a desk offered a tired wave. My mom ran this place, he said. She started it with nothing but a grant and a stubborn streak. Elara walked slowly through the space past faded posters and fraying couches. She died when I was 17, Zayden said, his voice lower now. I kept it open, I fund it now, quietly. She turned to him. Why quietly? Because it's not about me. Elara nodded, her throat tight. They sat on the bleachers for a while, watching the kids play. One of them, a boy with wild curls and a grin too wide for his face, ran over and launched himself into Zayden's lap. Z, the boy said, breathless. You missed my shot, did I? Zayden laughed, ruffling his hair. You'll have to show me again. Elara watched him, something shifting in her chest. Later, when they walked out into the cold air, she asked quietly, Who else gets to see this side of you? Zayden glanced at her. No one. That night, she kissed him before he could say goodbye, not gently, not carefully, like she meant it, and Zayden? He kissed her back with a hunger that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with need. The next week, her life tilted sideways. She was working a shift at the bookstore. She'd recently picked up her second job, one that paid in coffee and predictability, when a man in a charcoal vest walked in and handed her a cream-colored envelope. No words, just the envelope. Inside was an invitation. Thick, embossed, and unmistakably expensive, you are cordially invited to a private charity gala hosted by the Kessler Foundation. Her name was handwritten at the bottom. She called him on her break. You sent a messenger. I wanted it to feel official, Zayden said, his voice teasing. Zayden, I don't own anything even close to gala appropriate. I know. That's why there's a box being delivered to your apartment in about 20 minutes. She stared into the phone. You didn't. I did. She opened the box that evening with shaking hands. Inside was a floor-length gown the color of dusk with delicate beading across the bodice. It shimmered even in her small apartment's dim light. Beneath it, a note. I want them to see what I already know, that you belong anywhere you walk into. She tried to find a reason not to go. But she wore the dress, and he was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase at the hotel ballroom, dressed in a crisp tuxedo with a velvet lapel. The moment he saw her, his entire face changed. He didn't say anything. Just offered his arm and led her into a room full of people who turned to look and did not look away. The night unfolded like a dream until it didn't. Near the end of the evening, a woman cornered her by the champagne bar. Older, polished. Wearing a necklace that could have paid Elara's rent for 10 years. You're the one he's been hiding, the woman said, not unkindly. I'm surprised he brought you here. Elara blinked. I'm sorry. I've known Zayden since he was a boy. I've never seen him bring someone into this world. Not really. I'm not sure what you're implying. The woman gave her a rueful smile, that you shouldn't get too comfortable. Elara didn't respond. She found Zayden across the room, laughing with a group of men in suits, and something in her twisted. When he saw her face, he was at her side in seconds. What happened? Nothing, she lied, but the seed had been planted, and it grew. Over the next few days. She started noticing things. Calls he wouldn't take in front of her, events he didn't mention until the last second. A shift in the air between them, not colder but heavier, like he was carrying something he hadn't shared. One night, after dinner in a quiet Italian place tucked into a side street, she asked him, Why me? He looked up from his wine. What do you mean, you could have anyone? Someone who fits into your world, someone who knows how to walk in heels and smile at the right people and speak French at dinner. I don't want someone who fits into my world, he said. I want someone who makes me want to leave it behind. She stared at him. I want you. Elara wanted to believe him, but she couldn't silence the voice that whispered what happens when the shine wears off. When the novelty fades, she didn't say any of that. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand. But the cracks had started. And the first one came all the way open when she opened her door one evening and found a well-dressed man waiting. Elara Zane, he asked. Yes, he handed her a manila folder. Inside were papers, contracts, documents with the Kessler Foundation name printed in bold at the top. A non-disclosure agreement. She read the first page 3 times before it registered. He was protecting himself from her. She didn't call him that night. She didn't answer when he called her. And when he showed up at her apartment the next morning, she opened the door, held up the folder, and asked one question. Why? Zayden didn't hesitate. Because I'm not just a man with money, Elara. I'm a target. People use me, people sell stories, people dig into my life and twist it. I didn't want that to happen with you. You think I'd sell you out? Her voice cracked. No, but I've learned not to take chances. She stared at him. Then maybe you don't know me at all. And for the first time since the wedding, Zayden Kessler had no words. Elara didn't cry until the elevator doors closed behind her. Standing in the lobby of her building, barefoot, the contract folder still clutched in her hand, she had held it together. But once inside the tiny metal box with mirrored walls and silence so loud it pressed against her ears, her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the paper still trembling in her grip. It wasn't the contract itself, it was what it meant. It meant he didn't trust her. That no matter what he'd said, no matter how many times he'd looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the room, deep down, he still believed she might hurt him. And that hurt more than if he'd never cared at all. She didn't answer his calls after that. Not the first, not the fifth, not the one that came just after midnight when she knew he'd be pacing, probably barefoot on some rooftop terrace, trying to figure out how he'd gone from dancing with a stranger to losing her completely. By the third day, the silence had calcified into something heavier. It wasn't avoidance anymore, it was protection. For both of them, Elara threw herself into work. She picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, helped organize a local author reading, even stayed late to reshelve an entire section after a toddler had decided the romance aisle was a better place for dinosaur books. Anything to stay busy. But distraction only went so far. Because Zayden had left fingerprints on her life. She saw him in every brushed-back suit jacket, every couple that laughed too closely over coffee, every time her phone lit up with a number she refused to block. And then came Lee. She showed up at Elara's door with 2 coffees and a look that said she wasn't leaving without answers. I'm not here to play mediator, she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission, but Zayden asked me to talk to you. That sounds exactly like a mediator. Lee set the coffee down. He's never asked me for anything, El, not once. Not even when I was engaged and he flew in a violinist from Vienna because I liked one song in college. Elara folded her arms. That's not a selling point. I'm just saying, Lee said, sitting on the edge of the couch. He's not the kind of guy who begs, but he's trying. Elara didn't respond. Lee leaned forward. Did you ever stop to think that maybe he gave you that contract because he's been burned before? That doesn't justify. No, it doesn't, Lee interrupted. But it explains it. He's not perfect, El. He's just scared, and the difference is he still showed up. Even scared? Elara looked away, jaw tight. Lee stood. You owe it to yourself to at least hear him out. That night, she found herself standing outside the same hotel where the gala had been held. The doorman recognized her and opened the door without a word. She took the elevator to the top floor. The penthouse suite was quiet when she knocked. No music, no hum of conversation, just silence. Then the door opened and there he was. Zayden didn't look like the man she'd met at the wedding. His jacket was off, shirt sleeves rolled up, tie hanging forgotten on a side chair. His hair wasn't styled and there was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Elara, he said, like her name was a sentence. She stepped inside without a word. The suite was sprawling, all glass and gold fixtures and a view that stretched to the river. But what caught her eye wasn't the decor, it was the table near the window. A folder sat on it, the same one she'd been handed days ago. Only now it was open and a pen lay across the top. I never wanted you to see that, he said quietly. Then why give it to me? Because I panicked, he admitted. Because I've had people lie to me, steal from me, sell stories, and I thought, if I got ahead of it, I could protect what we had. She turned to face him. You didn't protect it. You killed it, his face twisted. I know. They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them full of everything unsaid. Then he walked to the table and picked up the folder. I never filed it, he said. I never even signed it. He opened the window and without ceremony tossed the entire folder out into the night. Elara stepped forward, stunned. What are you doing? Something I should have done the second you looked at me like I was more than my bank account. The wind caught the papers and scattered them like confetti. Somewhere below, a cab honked. He turned back to her. "You were the only thing in my life that felt real." "And I let fear ruin it." She didn't answer, couldn't. He took a step closer. "I told myself I didn't believe in love anymore, that it was transactional, temporary, but then you danced with me, and suddenly I wanted things I hadn't wanted in years." His voice cracked. "I wanted you." Elara's eyes burned. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said. "I'm asking you to believe that I'm still learning how to be the man you deserve." She stepped closer, her voice unsteady. "I don't want perfect, Zayden. I never did. I just wanted honesty." He nodded. "Then here it is." "I love you." The words hit her like a gust of wind, sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. She blinked. "Say it again." He reached for her hand. "I love you," and then she kissed him, not like she had something to prove, not like she was trying to forget the pain. She kissed him like she'd finally found the place she'd been circling around for months, like she'd come home. Later, they sat on the floor with a bottle of wine and no glasses, bare feet pressed against the cool marble. Zayden ran a hand through his hair. "You know, I've never been scared of losing money or buildings or deals, but you," he looked at her. "The thought of losing you made me forget how to breathe." Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. "Then don't forget again." "I won't." The next morning, he took her to a building in Midtown, not a restaurant, not a penthouse, a bookstore. The sign out front was old, hand-carved. Inside, the shelves were tall and dark wood, the kind of place where you could lose hours without trying. "This was my mother's favorite place," he said. "I bought it when it went up for sale last year." Elara turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's beautiful." "It's closed to the public," he said, "but I'd like to open it again as a community space for readings, art shows." "Book clubs," she looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to help me run it." Her mouth fell open. "What? You once told me you wanted to create something that mattered, something that lasted. This could be that." She stared at him, heart pounding. "You'd trust me with this." "I'd trust you with anything." And just like that, the cracks between them didn't disappear, but they began to heal, because trust, once broken, doesn't vanish with a promise. It rebuilds slowly, brick by brick, moment by moment. And in that quiet bookstore, under the soft glow of morning light, they laid the first stone, together. The grand opening of the bookstore had originally been scheduled for early spring, but Zayden postponed it without hesitation when Elara said she wanted more time to develop the programming. He didn't ask for details or push for deadlines. He simply handed her the keys, stepped back, and said, "Build it your way." That was how Elara found herself spending the next several weeks immersed in paint swatches, local art submissions, and coordinating with poets, musicians, and small publishers who were all thrilled to be part of something that felt like a resurrection. The space was no longer just beautiful, it was alive. The old wooden shelves had been restored, sections were reorganized by theme and emotion rather than genre, and every corner held a story. There was even a small raised platform by the rear windows, where soft lighting poured in, now repurposed for readings and performances. Zayden stopped by when he wasn't traveling for meetings or taking calls from Zurich, Hong Kong, and cities Elara could barely pronounce. But when he was with her, he wasn't a millionaire with a seven-figure portfolio. He was the man who spent an entire afternoon helping her alphabetize donated children's books, sleeves rolled up and a pencil stuck behind his ear. One Saturday morning, as she was unboxing a shipment of hand-bound journals from a local artist, he walked in carrying a tray of pastries from a cafe that hadn't even opened yet. "I convinced them to let me in early," he said, handing her a croissant that still radiated heat. "Told them my girlfriend was running a community cornerstone and needed sustenance." Elara blinked. "You called me your girlfriend." Zayden paused. "Is that a problem?" She walked around the counter, took the croissant, and kissed him once softly. "Not unless you plan on upgrading me to partner," he grinned. "That's the goal." They sat on the windowsill together, eating in comfortable silence. Outside, the city had begun to thaw. The streets were still gray, but the air had shifted. Spring wasn't here yet, but the promise of it lingered. Zayden stared out the window. "I've been thinking about something big." Elara looked at him, heart skipping. "Define big." "I've been offered a permanent seat on the Kessler International Board," he said. "It's a global restructuring initiative. It would mean stepping back from daily operations and focusing on the foundation. More time here, more stability." Her brows lifted. "You do that," he turned to face her. "I've spent years chasing things that looked important on paper, but none of it meant anything until I met you. You made me realize that creating something meaningful, something that lasts, starts with being present. What would that mean for you? It would mean giving up control of a few things, letting others take the wheel, but I'd still be involved, just not buried in it." Elara considered that. "You're serious?" Deadly, she touched his hand. "Then I'd be honored to build something with you." The official reopening of the bookstore drew city council members, artists, authors, and dozens of families from the surrounding neighborhoods. News outlets covered it as a feel-good story, a forgotten literary space reborn by a mysterious investor, and a local creative with a vision. Zayden didn't speak to reporters. He let Elara take the spotlight. And when she stood at the mic on that first night, reading an original poem she'd written about second chances, he leaned against a bookshelf, arms crossed, and watched her like she was the only person in the room. After the crowd had thinned and the last guest had drifted out into the night, he locked the doors and turned to her. "I've never seen you like that," he said, "terrified on stage, brilliant," he corrected. "Like you were standing exactly where you were supposed to be." She smiled, and for a moment there was only silence. Then he walked to the center of the room, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a small black box. Elara's breath caught. "I didn't plan on doing this tonight," he said, flipping it open. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single diamond set in a gold band that gleamed under the low lights. "But then I watched you build something from the ground up. I watched you turn this place into a home, not just for books but for people, and I realized I want to build every part of my life with you." She stared at him, chest rising and falling. "You told me once that trust is a choice," he said. "So I'm choosing you every day, every hour. Every future version of myself, I want you beside me." Elara took a step forward. "This feels like one of your grand gestures." "It is," he said. "But it's also the simplest truth I've ever known. I love you. I want to marry you." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Zayden let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it since the moment they'd met. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook just slightly, and when she kissed him, it wasn't the kind of kiss that made promises. It was the kind that kept them. They were married 2 months later in the same community center his mother had once run, now restored and renamed in her honor. The wedding was small, intimate, and completely theirs. No press. No diamonds the size of golf balls. Just the people who mattered, and a ceremony that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of something even more extraordinary. Lee officiated, standing between them with a grin that threatened to split her face. "Do you, Elara Zane, promise to keep him grounded even when he tries to buy out entire bookstores just to impress you?" Elara laughed. "I do." "And do you, Zayden Kessler, promise not to draft any more contracts without reading the emotional fine print?" "I do," he said, voice thick with emotion. The reception was held in the bookstore, now decorated with hanging lanterns, soft jazz playing in the background, and tables nestled between shelves. Guests wandered through the aisles sipping wine, writing notes in leather-bound journals left on the tables instead of a traditional guestbook. Zayden pulled Elara onto the small platform where she had once read poetry, and they danced slowly, deliberately beneath the soft glow of string lights and the scent of old pages. "You know," she whispered, "I could have sworn I saw you first." He tilted his head. "At the wedding," she nodded. "You were standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching. I was trying to figure out how to ask the most beautiful woman in the room to dance. You didn't know a thing about me," he smiled. "I didn't need to," she leaned in. "Still think I don't belong in your world," he shook his head. "You redefined it." And when the music swelled and the room blurred around them, they moved together like they'd been dancing for years. No spotlight, no pretense. Just Elara and Zayden, hands bound, hearts open, and a future unfolding beneath their feet. Because once upon a time, she danced with a stranger at a wedding. And somehow, impossibly, that stranger became the love of her life. Rain misted over the city in a fine silver veil, the kind that softened everything it touched: rooftops, sidewalks, even the sharp edges of memory. Elara stood beneath the narrow overhang outside the bookstore, hands tucked into the pockets of her long wool coat, watching the final construction crew finish sealing the new sign above the door. The carved wood gleamed, varnished and bold: Zayden Kessler Literary House. A name they had chosen together after a long night spent curled up on the couch debating everything from punctuation to font style. They'd laughed until they cried when Zayden suggested including an ampersand shaped like a heart. In the end, they'd settled on clean serif letters, elegant and strong. Just like them, the rain intensified, but she didn't move. Zayden would be there soon. He'd called her from the airport and said he'd be there by noon. It was nearly that now. He was flying in from Geneva, where he'd been finalizing the International Literacy Fund. They'd co-founded together an initiative for underserved communities that was already gaining international momentum. It had been his idea, but hers in spirit. They were a team now, in every way. She heard the familiar low purr of an engine before she saw the car. Black, understated, a far cry from the ostentatious choices Zayden had once favored. He stepped out without an umbrella, suit jacket unbuttoned, rain catching in his hair. He crossed the street like he couldn't get to her fast enough. "You're early," she said, her voice soft and warm. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. "You're out here getting soaked. I had to make sure you didn't float away before I saw the new sign." She tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "It's official now." "Looks good on the building," he said, "but it looks even better on you." They lingered there a moment, the rain forgotten. He pulled her toward the door, unlocking it with a key they both carried now, and stepped inside. The scent of old pages, fresh wood polish, and the faintest trace of lavender from the new reading room filled the air. It was home in every sense. But something about Zayden's stillness as he looked around made her pause. "What is it?" she asked. "I've been thinking," he said, brushing a hand over the counter. "I don't want to go back," Elara blinked, "to Geneva, to any of it, the board meetings, the flight schedules. Even the foundation can run without me now. I've trained the right people. It's time I started living the life we've been building instead of passing through it in between red-eye flights." She stepped closer. "You're serious?" "I've never been more sure of anything. I want this to be my world now. Not just something I fund or visit, but something I live in, every single day." She reached for his hand. "Then stay." "I already have," he said. They walked through the shop together, checking small details before the evening's inaugural literary salon. The shelves were fully stocked, the seating area arranged in a semicircle, and soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. Elara had chosen every track herself, creating a mood that felt like stepping into a story. The guest list included local poets, authors, educators, and families from the community. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. As the first guests arrived, Elara greeted them, while Zayden moved through the room offering drinks and making introductions. Watching him in this setting, not as the man with the penthouse or the private jet, but as someone who had found his rhythm in a quieter kind of power, made her chest ache with something close to awe. Later, after the readings had ended and the lights dimmed slightly, she stood near the back wall, glass of wine in hand, watching the last guests leave. Zayden joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "I spoke to my father yesterday," he said, voice low. Elara turned to him. "How did that go?" He's stepping down completely. "Said he never thought I'd walk away from the empire, but now that I have, he wants to actually live for once. He and his new wife are moving to Tuscany." Elara raised a brow. "Tuscany," he bought an olive grove, she laughed. "That's oddly wholesome." He paused. "He also transferred the last of the Kessler family shares to me, said if I ever change my mind, the door's open. Will you?" He shook his head. "No." That chapter's closed. They returned to the apartment late that night, kicking off their shoes and shedding the weight of the day. The penthouse had changed. It was still sleek, but now scattered with things that didn't match: books stacked on side tables, A throw blanket in a color Elara insisted brought warmth, plants that Zayden remembered to water half the time. There was even a small framed photo of the two of them at the bookstore's soft launch, Elara mid-laugh, Zayden looking at her like he couldn't believe she was real. She curled up onto the couch, pulling her legs beneath her, and watched him loosen his tie. "I never asked you," she said, "what you thought the first time you saw me. At the wedding." He leaned against the doorway. She nodded. "I thought you looked out of place," he said honestly. She laughed. "Wow, thanks, in the best way," he added. Like someone who wasn't pretending to fit in, someone who didn't need a mask, she studied him. "I thought you were trouble." "I was. But you're not anymore." He walked toward her, knelt in front of the couch, and rested his hands on her knees. "I'm yours," he said simply. She reached down, brushing her fingers through his hair. "That's the same thing." They got married again that fall, not a legal ceremony since they already had one, but a celebration just for them and those who had become family. They held it in the bookstore's event space, now used weekly for everything from story time to music nights. It was filled with candles, soft jazz, and books stacked like centerpieces. This time she wore a simple ivory dress, barefoot on the hardwood floor. He wore a gray vest and no tie. The vows were short. "I chose you when I didn't know how to choose anything," she told him. "And I found you when I didn't know what I was missing," he said. They danced slowly to a string quartet playing a piece she'd written lyrics for, now turned into a lullaby for their future. Because there would be a future. A year later, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Aria. She had Elara's eyes and Zayden's quiet intensity. And from the moment, they wrapped her in a pale blue blanket and held her between them, the world narrowed to 3 heartbeats and a single promise. To never lose sight of what mattered. They didn't hire a nanny. They took turns with the late nights, the feedings, the lullabies hummed in imperfect harmony. Aria's first steps were taken on the bookstore floor, toddling between shelves as customers clapped and cheered. Her first word was book. Elara returned to writing, publishing her first collection of essays about love, fear, and building a life from mismatched pieces. Zayden built a small publishing imprint under their name, focused on debut authors from underrepresented backgrounds. It was quiet work. But it was meaningful. And on rainy mornings, they still danced in the kitchen, barefoot and messy-haired, Aria giggling in her high chair as her parents spun clumsily across the tile. Because once upon a time, a girl who didn't believe in fairy tales met a man who didn't believe in love. And together, they rewrote the ending, not with glass slippers, but with ink-stained hands, open doors, and hearts that had learned how to stay.